Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me this Sunday. I'm Frederica Whitfield. The U.S. government is open for business for now, but the clock is ticking. Democrats and Republicans have just 19 days to agree on a bill to fund the government past February 15th. If they cannot, the president has threatened to use executive action to fund his border wall. And while the government has reopened, the damage is already done. That historic shutdown cost the U.S. economy at least $6 billion, according to a new report by S&P Global Ratings, Standard & Poor Global Ratings. That is more expensive than the president's border wall request. So, was the shutdown worth it? And where do things go from here? Lawmakers on both sides weighing in this morning.
Shutdowns are never good policy, ever. They are never to be used as a means to achieve any kind of goal, no matter how important that goal may seem to be. We cannot have the threat of a government shutdown hanging over our people and our economy.
We all know that these workers were held hostage by the president. We all know it's a strategy the American people abhorred, and that's why the president had a cave. But we also want to make sure it never happens again, whomever is president, whomever is in Congress.
All right, let's check in now with CNN's White House correspondent, Boris Sanchez. So, Boris, the Trump administration not backing down from their threat to bypass Congress to get the president his border wall.
That's right, Fred. The White House has been exploring different ways of bypassing Congress and getting money for the president's border wall for some time. Those essentially fall into two categories. The president could declare a national emergency, as he's been threatening for some time, and then get money for his border wall that way. He hasn't gone that direction because there's really no guarantee that that would actually work, with Democrats promising to try to block that action in court. The other option is to look for funds elsewhere in the Department of Defense and the Department of the Treasury. But according to sources, according to people familiar with the plan so far, all of that money combined would not reach the president's demand for $5.7 billion. That sort of down payment that he wants for building his long-promised border wall. So for the president and his team, it's back to the drawing board, yet again threatening to shut down the federal government, essentially a repeat of the past month or so, if the president doesn't get what he wants. It's unclear exactly why the president and his team feel like they can get something different this time around, but as the acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, said this morning, the president is determined.
Is the president really prepared to shut down the government again in 3 weeks?
Yeah, I think he actually is. Keep in mind, he's willing to do whatever it takes to secure the border. He does take this very seriously. This is a serious humanitarian and security crisis, and as President of the United States, he takes the security of the nation as his highest priority. He doesn't want to shut the government down. Let's make that very clear. He doesn't want to declare a national emergency.
Well, Fred, Mulvaney reiterated the president's demand for $5.7 billion in border wall funding, saying that that's what border security experts have told the president that he needs, though he did say the president isn't married to that figure, but he wouldn't specify what the president would accept to essentially move on and let the government run without threatening to shut it down again. Fred.
All right, Boris Sanchez, thank you so much at the White House. All right, joining me right now, Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters. She is also the ranking member on the Financial Services Committee. Good to see you, Congresswoman. All right, so what will be the focus for the next 19 days? Do you see that there will be an agreement in border funding to avoid another shutdown?
Well, I certainly hope that we can get an agreement. It's been too long. Too many of our federal employees have suffered. We saw the suffering. We saw federal employees standing in food lines. And so I'm hopeful that this is a serious and credible negotiation, and particularly on the president's part. You know, the president changes his mind. We don't know if he's going to, abide by any rules of negotiation. As a matter of fact, I was stunned after he came out and announced that he was going to participate in opening up the government. He started to do the attack again, and basically
he started to threaten, the emergency route.
That's right.
And even you heard from, Mick Mulvaney, who said once again, while the president wants to keep the government open, they are exploring places where they could extract money to help justify this emergency declaration. So which is it? What is the sense you get from the White House in terms of how it will be participating in any negotiations where there is wiggle room?
It's hard to believe that he is prepared to seriously negotiate when he's making his demands outside of the negotiation already. First of all, he's talking about he's got to have a certain amount of money. He's also talking about how terrible it is with the rapists and the drug dealers and on and on and on. That's not how you enter a negotiation. You shut up and you shut down and you get into the negotiation and you legitimately lay your concerns on the table, and people are prepared to talk about what they can and cannot do.
So then does this tell you that it's going to be a repeat experience?
I hope not. We believe in border security, and we have offered, how we think it can be done. We want to make sure that he understands that it's not simply about a wall. I want him to think about, and we want him to think about technology. We want him to think about drones. We want him to think about all of those things that go into having a secure border. And so I just don't know. I don't trust him very much. Because he's agreed to some things and then backed off of them, and action in danger. Just think what is happening to our air traffic controllers. Many of them are under a lot of stress because they did not get their pay. They had to come back to work because they were considered among those employees that must work despite the fact that they're not getting paid. They're under stress. Many of them are working long hours. Some of them are working in towers with only one individual there, one traffic controller, air traffic controller. And so I don't know if he understands that he was about to shut this nation down.
Except, is that the imagery and are those the sentiments from air traffic controllers and flight attendants that actually got the president's attention, seeing how commerce, how the economy was being disrupted with these, ground stoppages? Because we heard from federal workers for 5 weeks who talked about their personal hardships, but it was another thing to see those images perhaps on television, and then you had the president say, government back open again.
Well, I think that the air traffic controllers sent us a serious message. They sent out a letter that talked about the dangers that were possibly involved in what was going on, and said it was so awesome and it's so huge, the possibility of the risk that was being, put into effect by this president. They couldn't even tell you how bad it was going to be. I think that had something to do with it. But the most thing is Nancy Pelosi had made a legitimate offer. Nancy Pelosi had also employed a legitimate strategy. So it's a combination of those things that made him back down. He had to back down. He had no choice. So he should not come into this negotiation with threats.
So there was real unity demonstrated by the Democrats, perhaps by a representation of the president's thinking this go round with 19 more days. This is what the acting White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, had to say this morning about the White House's, the president's persistent demand for the wall.
Well, there are some pots of money that are easier to get to than to others. So, again, this is not something we're shooting on from the hip. We've been working on this for months. We have been hoping for months to do it through legislation with Democrats because that's the right way for the government to function. But at the end of the day, the president's commitment is to defend the nation, and he'll do it either with or without Congress.
So again, hours after, the president made his announcement, he was tweeting about this option of an emergency declaration. So how is Congress preparing for President Trump to try to establish that there is a national emergency, a crisis, so these pots of money, as Mulvaney was referring to, would be made available?
Well, let me just say this. I think the American people and our federal workers, including the air traffic controllers, we have all made everybody understand what a dangerous situation we're in. And I don't know where they're talking about getting this money from, but I know this. I know that even if they were able to find money that was not in the control of the Congress, they have had all kind of other issues to deal with, eminent domain issues. They don't even know the terrain.
You're talking about the land mostly privately owned along the Texas border.
That's right.
And then there was some inference that perhaps from Mulvaney, money would come from Treasury or perhaps even Defense Department. And you don't see those as viable options.
No, I don't. I don't have any idea what they're talking about. I've heard all kind of things, that he was going to take money from housing, that he was going to get money from places where there is no money. And so again, this president starts out bluffing and threatening all over again. I would just hope he would settle down and come to his senses, because he doesn't understand the role of the three branches of government. He thinks he can just run over the House and the Senate, but we're proving that he can't do that, and it won't work. And so I hope that he would have sense enough, or his advisors would have sense enough, to send him into a negotiation in a legitimate way. We don't play threats. We are together. The Democrats are solid, and we're not going to be intimidated by him. We want legitimate negotiations to try and make sure that we never put the American people or our workers into the situation that we put them in, threatening the entire economy of this country.
So, Congresswoman, you for a very long time have, led this charge for impeaching the president. You are the chair of the House Financial Services Committee. And a recent Washington Post polling is supporting Democrats, opening a range of investigations of Trump, including suspected ties between foreign governments. However, that same poll shows that only 40% believe Congress should begin impeachment proceedings. So how are you prioritizing that whole idea this go round?
Well, let me just say this. I am pleased that I started the conversation early. I believe that the president early on had defined himself as someone who was incapable of being a legitimate president. And so I started the conversation. Of course, we got a lot of criticism. I got a lot of criticism. But he has been defining himself ever since. And you will hear impeachment being talked about more and more. 80% of Democrats believe that he should be impeached. I know that the Congress of the United States is slow and reticent to do it, without having all of the facts. And they're waiting on Mueller to come back with the information that would either say he colluded with the Russian government, or he obstructed justice, or he committed some other kinds of crime. We want to hear what Cohen has to say. He's been subpoenaed. He has additional information. And so we have a ways to go, but I believe that I've been right all along, that I was able to understand what he's all about and his allies, their connection to the oligarchs of Russia, they intent on being able to lift those sanctions. And I believe that was part of the agreement with sending Manafort there to help run the campaign, that if this president was elected, that he would lift those sanctions so that Putin and the oligarchs would have their way in moving forward with drilling for oil and other kinds of things that they want to do to continue to enrich themselves.
So you're still intrigued by the idea, but are you kind of slowing the roll on pushing for impeachment proceedings?
Oh, I'm never going to change my mind on it. I've said what I believe in.
Okay.
I'm going to move forward as the chair, doing legitimate work of the Financial Services Committee. That doesn't stop me from doing that. We have a lot to do. We've got to be concerned about predatory lending and all of those issues, housing, homelessness, etc. I'm going to work on that.
Okay, and then real quick, the field for Democrats, throwing their hats into the ring or at least launching exploratory committees for 2020 is widening today. Senator Kamala Harris has her launching of a campaign rally in Oakland, California, your fellow Californians.
Yes,
so, do you have any favorites thus far? Who are you supporting or backing?
Well, I have not announced anything at this point. And Frederica, when I do it, it won't be, on national TV this way. It will be getting with the candidate and helping to understand how they're going to direct the issues of this country. It'll be helping to understand where they stand on progressive issues, etc. So I'm watching, I'm looking, I'll be talking with them. And at some point, I certainly will make a decision. But we're going to have a lot to choose from, aren't we?
Yes, so far, yes. All right, California Congresswoman Maxine Waters, thank you so much.
Thank you so very much.
All right, still ahead, an about face from one of the president's allies, Roger Stone, now saying he is willing to testify in the special counsel's investigation. This, as Stone's own longtime friend tells CNN he has no problem telling Robert Mueller the truth about Stone's link between Trump's campaign and WikiLeaks.
America's #1 meal kit company can get you.
Longtime Trump associate Roger Stone says he is not ruling out cooperating with special counsel Robert Mueller. On Tuesday, Stone will be arraigned in Washington, D.C. on multiple charges, including witness tampering, lying, and obstruction. His indictment draws a connection between him, the Trump campaign, and WikiLeaks for damaging information on the Clinton campaign. Stone denies the charges, calling them politically motivated. Now, President Trump is attempting to perhaps distance himself from Stone, friend of 40 years. The president tweeting this, in part, quote, Roger Stone didn't even work for me anywhere near the election. After repeatedly saying he would not testify against the president, today Stone now says he's open to testifying.
Any chance you'll cooperate with special counsel Robert Mueller if he asks?
That's a question I'd have to determine after my attorneys have some discussion. If there's wrongdoing by other people in the campaign that I know about, which I know of none, but if there is, I would certainly testify honestly. I'd also testify honestly about any other matter, including any communications with the president. It's true that we spoke on the phone, but those communications are political in nature, they're benign, and there is certainly no conspiracy with Russia.
CNN Justice correspondent Jessica Schneider joining me right now. So, Jessica, Stone continues, to talk ahead of this court appearance. Why is he so comfortable and really eager to do so?
Maybe trying to talk now before he appears in court on Tuesday. But you're right, Frederica. Roger Stone's media blitz, it continues. But his tone does seem to be softening ever so slightly. So Stone there pledging to tell the truth about his communications with Donald Trump, but then also saying he never spoke with the president about Russia, either during the campaign or since Trump has become president. And Stone, interestingly, also shed a little bit of light on who that senior Trump campaign official might have been who was directed to ask Roger Stone about any upcoming releases from WikiLeaks back in July 2016. Stone saying, sure, it could have been Rick Gates, the former deputy campaign manager to Paul Manafort. Gates, of course, has been cooperating with Robert Mueller's team for almost a year now since pleading guilty. But Roger Stone says he doesn't have any emails or documents to back up that it was 100% Gates, and he says he doesn't really remember. And Stone also insisted that he has no idea who may have actually directed Gates, amid, of course, much speculation. And another person blasting the airwaves this morning, individual one from that indictment, Jerome Corsi. Corsi, of course, a longtime friend and associate of Roger Stone. And during the campaign, Corsi predicted that WikiLeaks would be leaking more and more documents. It is alleged in the indictment that Stone directed Corsi to get in touch with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange to get pending emails that could later be released. Corsi, though, says he has never been in touch with Assange and instead was just a good predictor. And he also says that he would be willing to cooperate. Take a listen.
I'll be happy to testify if I would suspect to be subpoenaed, and I'll let the testimony fall wherever it falls. I'm going to tell the truth to the best of my ability. Even that's hard, given the amount of information and the fact that I've said from the beginning I'm not a human tape recorder. You can't push a button, and I can't recall precisely in detail, granularly, conversations, emails, events from 2016. But I'm going to do my best to tell the truth without calculation of whom it benefits or whom it detracts.
And Jerome Corsi, he's already been talking because he's been interviewed by Mueller's team multiple times, and he's actually said that he's already sat for 40 hours worth of interviews. Corsi and his lawyer, though, they do not believe that Jerome Corsi will be indicted. And interestingly, Frederica, Corsi's put it this way to CNN back in November. He said that Mueller and his team have everything and know everything. So very ominous words from Jerome Corsi and what may be to come with this probe. Fred?
Essentially saying, they're looking for corroboration. So those testimonies are going to be critical. Interviews as well. All right, Jessica Schneider, thank you so much. So with me now is Michael Zeldin, a former federal prosecutor and a former special assistant to Robert Mueller at the Department of Justice and a CNN legal analyst. Garrett Graff, author of Threat Matrix and a CNN contributor. Also with me is Michael Bender, a CNN political analyst columnist and a White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Good to see all of you. Thank you. All right, so Michael, you first. Stone now says he is open to the possibility of cooperating with the Mueller investigation, testifying. He says he's willing to tell the truth and has nothing to hide. So is he changing his tune?
I don't think so, because he also saying that I have no evidence that anyone has done anything wrong, including the president. And so that's been his, party line all along. So I'm not sure exactly what it is that he's saying that's any different than what he said all along. And so he's on a media blitz, and I'm surprised his lawyer allows that. But, he's
And what would be behind that? Why? I mean, why wouldn't his attorney feel that was, potentially dangerous territory? Because he does make reference to his attorney that, my attorney thinks it's okay. Yes, I'm willing to, tell the truth. And he's already said that he would be unwilling, to say anything that he believes was being coerced by investigators.
Second to Donald Trump, Roger Stone may be the second most difficult client to control. I think that Roger Stone has been counseled by his lawyers, be careful out there, and yet he keeps talking. He's already indicated what his defense is to this case, which is, I may have lied, but I did so unintentionally. I forgot. It was immaterial. Why you would do that is beyond me, except that he's Roger Stone, and that's what Roger Stone does, and he's not going to change his spots at this point in his life, age 66.
He does like the limelight. He's said that himself. So while Stone is opening the door, to possibly testifying, cooperating, with Mueller, he does say that he has no plans to cut a deal and vows to win this court case. Take a listen.
Are you prepared to spend the last best years of your life in jail?
In view of the fact that I expect to be acquitted and vindicated, and that my attorneys, including Bruce Rogow, one of the very best attorneys in the country, Grant Smith, Rob Bushell, and Tara Campion, believe that this indictment is thin as piss on a rock. So I'm prepared to fight for my life.
So that gets your attention. So, Garrett, more than 90%, of federal indictments end in convictions. So based on what we know here, based on reading the indictment, why is he so certain that there would be an acquittal for him?
Well, I wouldn't, he may be saying that. I don't know that that's necessarily what he believes deep down. When you look at this indictment on paper, if Mueller has, and presumably he does, have the evidence to back it up, this is about as simple and straightforward an indictment as you could bring. Very heavily grounded in documents. In primary sources. You wouldn't actually even need a lot of corroborating testimony from other sources to help bring this case. I think this is obviously the negotiating position where you start out if you are Roger Stone. And that Roger Stone is also sort of looking at this in the big picture. This is something where if he goes down fighting, if he is able to either be acquitted on a hung jury, perhaps, in the courtroom, or does a short prison sentence and goes out and hits the conservative speaking circuit. Roger Stone hopes that he can dine out on this indictment for years to come, much in the way that one of the best things that ever happened to G. Gordon Liddy's career was getting wrapped up in Watergate.
So Michael Bender, recent Washington Post, polling supports Democrats opening a range of investigations of Trump and his campaign, including connections with Russian President Vladimir Putin. However, the same poll shows only 40% believe Congress should begin impeachment proceedings. So does that indicate that people are, still waiting for the results of the Mueller investigation, or are they tiring of it?
Yeah, and then that same poll, more people have fewer doubts about Trump's presidency after all of this Russia investigation, all of the Mueller news. The poll shows that Trump's approval rating right now is pretty steady. Top lines. This is not bad news for Trump. A small dip, but not. You would think after another associate in handcuffs. He just presided over the longest shutdown in U.S. history, and it's effectively unchanged in our poll that's out today. It's not exactly good news for Trump here. There's a lot of erosion in how people feel this president is equipped to do his job. A lot of people thought that coming into office that he was going to be a positive change agent. No more. More people now than...
And he said he was going to surround himself by the best people.
That's right. More people thought he was going to be effective at being president than didn't. Those numbers have reversed themselves. More people, over 50% of Americans, think he does not have the personal characteristics to be president. Compare that to President Obama at the same time. 15% said that about Obama. So Trump's top numbers are pretty steady. He has a very strong support core. He's shown an incredible resilience, but we're seeing some churning underneath that should give this administration, this president, some pause.
And then back to Roger Stone, he has said that he's not at all concerned that the president seems to be distancing himself from Stone, and says that his publicizing WikiLeaks documents was not against the law. Take a listen.
When Sarah Sanders says this has nothing to do with the president, she is correct. I never discussed these matters with the president. And everything that I did regarding trying to get as much public attention to the WikiLeaks disclosures among voters, among the media, is constitutionally protected free speech. That's what I engaged in. It's called politics, and they haven't criminalized it, at least not yet.
So, Michael Zeldin, is it as simple as that?
Well, it's complicated for sure. And I think central to the analysis is, what do you think WikiLeaks is? Our intelligence agencies say they are a non-state hostile intelligence service. Many others, including Roger Stone, say it is a First Amendment media-protected organization. If it is the latter, then I think Stone is correct that his talking to WikiLeaks does not implicate any criminal conspiracy. If WikiLeaks, on the other hand, is a non-state hostile intelligence service, then talking to them may well be. And so Mueller may have to make a decision. If he's going to bring a case like this, does he want to fight WikiLeaks on First Amendment grounds, in the same way that they fought with the release of the Pentagon Papers?
All right, we'll leave it there for now, gentlemen. Thank you so much, Michael Zeldin, Garrett Graff, Michael Bender. Appreciate it. All right, still ahead, Senator Kamala Harris is about to officially kick off a campaign rally in her hometown. How does she plan to stand out from an already crowded field of Democratic hopefuls? We'll take you there live next. In about an hour and a half, Senator Kamala Harris will appear at an official launch rally for her 2020 White House bid. That rally is being held in her hometown of Oakland, California. We'll bring it to you live as it happens. Harris is joining a crowded field of Democratic presidential hopefuls, which is already the most diverse in modern political history. CNN senior national correspondent Kyung Law is in Oakland. So what's the field look like in terms of the audience, and what is the expected message going to be?
Well, the public hasn't been quite allowed in, Frederica, but there's already a line forming outside of the perimeter here, just where we are standing, which is Oakland City Hall. This is the area right outside Oakland City Hall. Kamala Harris expected to say in her prepared remarks that CNN has obtained some excerpts of, that she is the one who is best poised to lead the country, to unify the country, both in biography as well as in her credentials. And part of it is the symbolism of what she is and who she is. I'll give you a look of where we are. We are in Oakland. You can see this is right in front of City Hall. The podium is set. The public will fill this center area. This is a city that the senator was born in. It is a diverse city. It has been for decades a place of protest, and it has continued through the Trump administration. This is the place where Kamala Harris was first a prosecutor, where she spoke the words Kamala Harris for the people, and it is now her campaign slogan. In those prepared remarks, she's expected to be populist in her issues. And here are the 5 points that the campaign has indicated that she will be laying out. That she will be fighting for Medicare for all, a middle-class tax cut, access to education. That includes universal preschool, as well as trying to make sure that when students leave college, they are debt-free. Criminal justice reform and fighting for climate change. One of the lines that she is expected to deliver will say this, quote, "I love our country and I feel a deep sense of responsibility to stand up and fight for the best of who we are and what our country can be. The people in power are no match for the power of the people. Now, Harris has already been on the campaign trail. She swung through South Carolina shortly before arriving here in Oakland. Part of the reason is that there has been a month-long soft launch. The Southern strategy trying to energize the black vote will be critical to winning in the South. But for today, Frederica, this is about launching her campaign in the heart of the city she was born in, and that she plans to have one of her campaign offices. Frederica?
Right, very familiar territory. It's also just a few blocks away from that city hall. You know, Kyung is the courthouse where, you know, she started her career as a prosecutor. So the people who are there are clearly going to be great advocates of her, but she is bracing herself for the kind of criticism that might come in scrutiny based on her record as a prosecutor. Has she or her campaign said anything about how they will preemptively try to address that?
This is something that has already come up at a number of her book stops. During her book tour, where she outlined her biography, she talks about being the kind of prosecutor who isn't just tough on crime, but smart on crime. That's a phrase that she commonly uses. And part of the reason for that is that she saw her career as a prosecutor as fighting from the inside to make change. Now, that has certainly opened her up for criticism, especially here in Oakland among the far left. Now, the left has said that she hasn't been enough of an action for change, that she's been too much of a prosecutor. But the campaign says that this is something that she has dealt with, that she has addressed, and she will continue to talk about, not just in sound bites, but in lengthy discussions with her voters. Fred?
All right, Kyung La, just an hour and a half away from this official launch rally there in Oakland for Kamala Harris. Thanks so much, Kyung. All right, still ahead, are women really being bound, duct taped, and abducted at the border? Next, we fact-check the president on his claim that there is rampant human trafficking at the southern border.
They're bound, duct tape put around their faces, around their mouths. In many cases, they can't even breathe. They're put in the backs of cars or vans or trucks. They don't go through your port of entry. They make a right turn going very quickly. They go into the desert areas or whatever areas you can look at. And as soon as there's no protection, they make a left or a right into the United States of America.
All right, that was President Trump on Friday justifying to the American people why there should be a wall along the southern border. Keep in mind, the fight over a border wall is the entire reason the government was shut down for 35 days. Now it's back up and running, people getting back to work this week. So that argument the president has made many times in the past in an effort to illustrate what he calls the crisis at the southern border. But is that an accurate depiction of what's really happening at the border? CNN's Polo Sandoval has been digging into that, and he's joining me now with more. Polo.
So, Fred, the president clearly has latched onto this idea that women and children are bound and smuggled across the border in that way that he just described here. We have been repeatedly trying to basically find evidence of that, turning to the White House to see if they can produce at least one or two specific cases of this kind of situation happening. So far, no response. We have, however, heard from some of those experts who deal with the victims of human trafficking, and they say the victims in this, the nightmares that they experience, just do not match what the commander-in-chief is saying.
I wish him luck.
It's President Trump's new go-to talking point in his attempt to convince Americans of his border wall. Build it and stop human trafficking in the U.S.
It's at the worst level, human trafficking, in the history of the world. They come through areas where they have no protection, where they have no steel barriers, where they have no walls. And we can stop almost 100% of that.
This was Friday in the Rose Garden as the president announced a temporary end to the government shutdown. He painted a vivid and startling picture of migrant women being restrained with duct tape and then snuck over the southern border.
Women are tied up, they're bound, duct tape put around their faces, around their mouths. In many cases, they can't even breathe.
If it seems like you've heard this before, you probably have. The president has described this terrifying trafficking tactic almost a dozen times in the last month.
They have women in the backseat of the cars with duct tape all over the place. They tape their face, their hair, their hands behind their back. Human traffickers tying up women, putting tape in their mouth.
They tie women up. They put duct tape over their mouth.
Women tied up, they have tape over their mouths, electrical tape, usually blue tape.
This is all a misconception, says Lori Cohen, director of a New York-based anti-trafficking initiative. Of the hundreds of trafficking victims she's represented, she's yet to meet one who has experienced what the president describes.
I don't know where the president's information is coming from. I don't believe it's coming from law enforcement. It's certainly not coming from victims, and it's not coming from the dozens of service providers who I've spoken with across the country.
The experts we spoke to say many victims of trafficking actually come into the U.S. legally, unaware they will be victimized by traffickers. Others are smuggled, but not restrained with tape before being driven over the border, as the president repeatedly claims.
Donald Trump has told this lurid tale full of bogus details of how he thinks human trafficking works, and it's just not what we see.
Martina Vandenberg, who also represents victims of trafficking, feels the president is intentionally misrepresenting human trafficking, adding it to his evolving list of reasons for his border wall.
He's ignoring the fact that about 66% of the cases that are handled by trafficking organizations are U.S. citizens. About 34% are foreign nationals. And of those foreign nationals who are coming in our experience, the vast majority of those foreign nationals are coming in on perfectly legal visas.
Vandenberg's organization keeps a database of 1,400 human trafficking-related indictments dating back to 2009. Of those cases, she says 26 involved kidnapping, and only one makes reference to duct tape.
It mentions duct tape, and it mentions someone being tied up with duct tape. But the victim was a U.S. citizen, not someone brought across the border from Mexico.
Customs and Border Protection, largely responsible for patrolling and protecting the southern border, declined to comment on the president's remarks. The White House did not respond to CNN's repeated attempts to clarify the president's unsupported anecdotes on human trafficking.
A critical voice in all this, the victims themselves. I had an opportunity to speak to a woman who we could only identify as Sandra for safety purposes. And she tells me that when she became the victim of human trafficking, really before that happened, she was actually smuggled over the border. And the situation, the nightmare that she experienced does not match what the president is describing today. Fred.
All right, Paula Sandoval, thank you so much. And we'll be right back. Steve Martin returns to Saturday Night Live, this time to play a real-life character pulled right from the headlines. Roger Stone, here's how Saturday Night Live played it up.
I'm just a poor, helpless old man. I'm 66. I'm almost as old as Sting.
And that's why it was so awful the way the police raided your home.
Exactly! The whole experience was so harrowing, and afterwards I could only manage one radio interview and a speech from the steps of the courthouse and 2 appearances on television. It's horrible!
And haven't these ridiculous accusations made you poverty-stricken as well?
Oh, yeah, that's right. I'm broke from my legal battles, and now no one will buy my books.
Well, why will no one buy your books?
Because they're bad!
Okay, just tell people how they can donate money to help you.
I've set up a donation page based on a phrase people have been yelling everywhere at me, called, "Hey, Roger, go fund yourself."
Well, thank you for your time, Mr. Stone.
Pardon me?
I said thank you.
Oh, no, that wasn't a question. I was saying that to the president. Pardon me!
All right, so much more straight ahead in the next hour of the newsroom. But first, here's a sneak peek of the CNN original film, 3 Identical Strangers.
When I tell people my story, they don't believe it, but